Manchester to the red half and talk about this guy, Rasmus Hojlund. His days at Manchester United could be numbered. How close is Rasmus Hojlund, Dan, to leaving Man United?
Well, look, I think after Benjamin Šeško signed over the weekend, have to say he was paraded at Old Trafford before the game with the likes of Matheus Cunha and Brian Mbeumo. There's a lot more questions over Rasmus Hojlund's future. Of course, a player they spent £72 million on just a few years ago, and we understand AC Milan are now in talks with Manchester United over a potential move for Hojlund. What I think United will want out of that type of potential deal is, I think they would be happy with a loan, but with an obligation to buy in terms of going into the future. One thing I do want to say about Hojlund, though, Matt, is yes, his future has been in question, but I've been around United in the last few days. I was at the training ground reopening on Friday, where the whole first-team squad, Ruben Amorim, were all there. Hojlund was there, smiles, acting very professional on Saturday, the last pre-season game at Old Trafford, seeing what seems to be his replacement getting paraded before the game at Old Trafford. During the penalty shootout against Fiorentina, he acted pretty positive amongst his teammates. And I think that type of behaviour has to be, seen as a real positive in a window where, for various reasons, you see players not training with their clubs or making huge statements because of their future. You have to admire the way Hojlund's gone about his business, whether he remains at United or not past the deadline.
Kevin, Man United permanent sale. Are AC Milan in a position where they could buy Hojlund, or is it going to be more of a loan situation? And how high is his stock still in Italy? Because that's obviously where he came from for Manchester United in the first place, scored a few goals out there.
I think it is still high. I think it's interesting as well, if you look at Joshua Zirkzee, for example, he's still quite highly rated in Italy. He was being linked with Juventus not that long ago. So players like Zirkzee and Hojlund have done it in Italy, not over a long spell of time, but they have proven that they can score goals, make goals. And what he did at Atalanta was very impressive, and that's what caused United to move for him and spend so much money. In terms of Milan, their situation's really interesting because they brought in Santi Jimenez, the Mexican striker from Feyenoord, and you thought, right, he's set to be there for the next few years. There's talk of him being moved on even now, which I think is bizarre, quite frankly. There's talk of them not only moving for Hojlund, but Dusan Vlahovic as well, who Juventus are desperate to get off their wage bill. And so if both of those were to come in, Milan suddenly wouldn't have room for Jimenez. So there does seem to be real interest, and I just wonder whether it'll end up being a loan with an obligation to buy something like that to give Milan a bit of...
And just a quick word on Hojlund. I mean, you also, even though he came out in pre-season and was adamant he wants United, against Fiorentina on Saturday, he was an unused substitute. Mason Mount started as a 9 instead of Hojlund, and he didn't come off the bench whatsoever. So for Hojlund now, I think he's getting an indication he's not part of Ruben Amorim's plans going forward. And I will go on about this for the whole window. It is a World Cup year. He needs to play football for his own international future to be at next summer's World Cup.
Well, he actually came on board before Ineos, didn't he, Hojlund? So if he goes, is this a sign that Ruben Amorim is slowly getting together his kind of team, his kind of players?
Absolutely, and I think we can have a look at some of the players Manchester United have signed since Ineos have joined the club, and it's very interesting, the two positions that they haven't signed in, or their gaps in that team, are potentially the two that they might be looking at before the deadline. We know that if they can, they would like to reinforce that midfield, but I think when you look at Hojlund's position, the one player isn't there, Joshua Zirkzee, is also potential, of course, as a forward. But I think when you look at Hojlund, he does maybe just come as a bit of a victim of this pre-Ineos era where, Jason Wilcox, Christopher Vivell have really led the recruitment at Manchester United. And, of course, Vivell, Kevin, was a huge reason as to why Šeško joined United, because he had scouted him at RB Salzburg and RB Leipzig as well.
Yeah, knew about him for many years, really pushed for that. And I think Šeško is a sign of where they're trying to go to. But we said that to some extent about Hojlund as well. I think it's going to be about creating a culture in which these younger players can thrive. So they've gone for an interesting blend, some more experienced players like Mbeumo, like Cunha, but also somebody like Šeško, who I think does have enormous potential, but has already got a bit of a track record. I think it's a real shame with Hojlund. I still think there's a really good player in there. I just think he's kind of been chewed up a bit at Old Trafford, and I think that can happen to a number of players. We've seen it with so many.
Yeah, and just when you look at those signings again, I think the one thing they all have in common is physicality, versatility in the majority of them. And I think that's really interesting in terms of potential any more interest in Carlos Baleba at Brighton as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We'll keep an eye on that.